They sold you a lie. Heal yourself, open your heart, become warm, become available, become the person everyone feels safe around. That's the story. That's what gets packaged and sold. It's wrong. Here's what actually happens when someone with deep emotional perception fully integrates their psychology. They don't become more accessible. They become more precise. And precision, in a world built on manipulation, is one of the most dangerous things a human being can develop. You were born reading rooms, reading faces, feeling the tension underneath words that sounded completely fine. You detected shifts in people's energy before they moved a single muscle. That's not a gift. That's a nervous system trained under threat, built in environments where missing a signal had consequences. You developed one of the most sophisticated perception systems on the planet, then spent 20 years apologizing for it. You called yourself too sensitive, too intense, too much. You muted the signal. You overrode every internal warning your system ever sent you because someone taught you that feeling everything made you weak. That was the real damage. Because feeling everything was never your problem. The problem was nobody taught you what to do with it. What happens when you finally learn, when you stop carrying what was never yours, is not what anyone prepares you for. You don't become softer, you become sovereign. And the second that happens, every person around you does one of two things. They rise to meet you, or they expose exactly who they always were. Both are information, and for the first time in your life, you'll know exactly what to do with it. There's a moment that happens somewhere in the middle of real healing, not the surface level kind, not the journaling and the breathing exercises kind, but the deep structural kind where something inside you actually shifts. And in that moment, you realize something that nobody in the self-help industry will ever say out loud. The people who used to control you can no longer read you, not because you built walls, not because you became cold or distant or emotionally unavailable, but because you stopped being predictable. And your predictability, your absolute reliable clockwork predictability, was the entire mechanism they used to keep you exactly where they needed you to be. Think about how it worked. Someone needed to make you feel guilty. They knew exactly which words to use. Someone needed to pull you back after you tried to leave. They knew exactly which version of vulnerability to perform. Someone needed to override your instincts. They knew exactly how to frame the conversation so that your empathy would do the work for them. You were readable. Every reaction you had, every threshold you had, every soft spot you carried, it was all mapped, it was all known, and it was all being used. That's not an accident, that's a system. And here's what nobody tells you about that system. It doesn't require the other person to be consciously malicious. Most of the time, they're not sitting down and strategically planning how to manipulate you. They don't need to, because you trained them. You showed them, through hundreds of interactions over months and years, exactly how you work. You showed them that guilt produces compliance, that silence produces anxiety in you, that threatening to leave produces immediate attempts at repair from you. They learned your operating system the way you learned to drive a familiar road, without thinking, without effort, just automatic. And then you healed. And the operating system changed. Suddenly the guilt doesn't land the same way. They deliver it. The exact same line, the exact same tone, the exact same look that used to send you into immediate apologetic overdrive, and you just look at them, calmly, without the reaction they were expecting. And you watch something happen on their face in that moment that is genuinely fascinating if you know what you're looking at. Confusion, a flicker of it, because the input happened, but the expected output didn't follow. The equation they'd been running for years suddenly doesn't compute. That confusion is the first sign that you've actually changed. Because real healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a speech or a confrontation or a dramatic moment where you finally say everything you should have said years ago. Real healing shows up as a pause where your reaction used to be. It shows up as stillness where there used to be panic. It shows up as you looking at someone mid-manipulation and thinking, with complete clarity, no anger, no bitterness, I see exactly what's happening here. And the moment you can see it without being pulled into it, you become functionally unreadable to everyone who depended on your unconscious participation. This is what integration actually produces. Not softness, not openness, not a wider capacity for forgiveness, though that comes too in its own time. What it produces first is illegibility. You stop being a predictable system that can be run by people who learned your inputs and outputs. You become someone whose responses come from a place they have never had access to and cannot locate. And that, more than any boundary you could ever set, is what actually protects you. At some point, someone convinced you that the way you experience the world is a problem that needs to be fixed. Maybe it was a parent who told you to stop being so emotional. Maybe it was a partner who said you were too intense, too deep, too much to handle. Maybe it was years of watching other people move through life seemingly unbothered while you were in the corner of every room picking up frequencies that nobody else even acknowledged existed, and slowly, quietly, without anyone making a formal announcement about it, you accepted the diagnosis. Sensitive, fragile, someone who feels too much. That belief did more damage to you than any person ever could. Because here is what was actually happening in those rooms, in those conversations, in those moments where you were absorbing what everyone else around you was conveniently not noticing. You were processing. Your nervous system was doing something genuinely sophisticated, picking up microsignals, reading emotional undercurrents, detecting inconsistencies between what people said and what their bodies were communicating in real time. You were doing in seconds what most people cannot do after hours of deliberate analysis. You were reading the actual truth of a situation while everyone else was still responding to the surface. That is not weakness. That is a perceptual system operating at a level most humans never reach. The problem was never the sensitivity. The problem was that you had the instrument, but no one ever taught you how to hold it. You had this extraordinary capacity to feel and detect and perceive, and zero framework for what to do with the information it gave you. So instead of using it, you absorbed it. Instead of observing other people's emotional states, you merged with them. Someone walked into your space carrying rage, and before they said a single word, that rage was already in your body, already affecting your nervous system, already making you feel like you had done something wrong, when the rage had nothing to do with you at all. That's the part that broke you, not the feeling. The confusion about whose feeling it actually was. And because you couldn't separate their experience from yours, you made a decision, unconsciously, gradually, over years, that the safest thing to do was to manage everyone else's emotional state before it could affect you. Keep the peace. Absorb the tension. Smooth the edges. Make yourself smaller so there was less of you for the room to react to. You turned your sensitivity inward and used it against yourself, running constant calculations about what everyone around you needed while completely losing track of what you needed. This is what unawareness does to a gift. It turns it into a liability, because the sensitivity itself was never the issue. Put that same nervous system inside someone who understood what they were carrying, someone who knew how to observe without absorbing, how to feel without merging, how to receive information without being consumed by it, and you don't have a fragile person. You have someone with an almost unfair advantage in understanding human behavior. You have someone who walks into a room and within minutes has more accurate information about the people in it than those people have about themselves. That's what your sensitivity actually is. Not a wound, not a character flaw, not something to manage or medicate or apologize for. It's a precision instrument that spent years being operated without a manual. And every single thing that felt like your weakness, every moment you thought you were too much, was actually just the instrument running without direction. The awareness is the manual, and once you have it, everything changes. Nobody prepares you for the anger. Everyone talks about healing like it's this universally celebrated event. Like the people in your life are sitting around waiting for you to get better so they can cheer you on. Like the moment you finally start choosing yourself, the room fills with applause, and the people who spent years depending on your dysfunction suddenly feel inspired and happy for you. That is not what happens. What actually happens is quieter and more revealing than anything you could have anticipated. When you stop absorbing, when you genuinely, structurally stop being the person who takes in everyone's chaos and processes it and smooths it over and makes it manageable. The people who depended on that function don't celebrate. They destabilize. And in that destabilization, they show you something they spent years keeping carefully hidden. They show you how much of the relationship was actually built on your willingness to disappear. Think about the mechanics of what you were doing before. Every time someone in your life was overwhelmed, you felt it and responded. Every time there was tension in the room, you moved to dissolve it. Every time someone was carrying something heavy, you positioned yourself to take some of the weight. You were doing this constantly, instinctively, without anyone asking, because your nervous system had been trained to treat other people's discomfort as a problem that required your immediate intervention. You were the emotional infrastructure, the load-bearing wall, the thing that kept the entire structure standing. And like any load-bearing wall, nobody thinks about you until you move. The moment you stop absorbing, the weight doesn't disappear. It redistributes. Suddenly, the people who never had to sit with their own chaos are sitting with it. The person who always had you to process their anger now has to hold it themselves. The person who could always rely on your guilt to pull you back now has to face the fact that the guilt isn't working anymore. The person who could always count on your empathy to override your judgment is now standing in front of someone whose empathy and judgment are finally operating together, and they cannot handle it. Not because they're necessarily bad people, but because you trained them, unintentionally, gradually, over years of consistent behavior, to need you in a very specific way. You trained them that you were available, that you would respond, that your boundaries were suggestions and your limits were negotiable and your need for peace was always less important than their need to be managed. You created an expectation through repetition, and now you're violating that expectation. To them, that violation feels like a threat, and they will respond to it like one. Some will get louder. They'll escalate the behavior that used to reliably pull you back in. More drama, more crisis, more urgency, because the strategy worked before and they're betting it will work again. Some will go quiet and strategic. They'll recruit other people, build narratives, reframe your growth as selfishness or coldness or betrayal. Some will simply tell you that you've changed, as if that's an accusation, as if the version of you that was silently disappearing for their comfort was somehow the better version worth preserving. All of it is information. Because what they're revealing in those moments, in the anger and the escalation and the sudden fragility, is the exact architecture of what the relationship was actually built on. Not connection, not genuine care, dependency, your dependency on their approval and their dependency on your availability. And the moment you stop being available in the way they need, the whole structure becomes visible for exactly what it always was. That visibility is not comfortable, but it is absolutely necessary. At some point during the process, you're going to want to go back. Not back to the specific person or situation that broke you open, but back to the version of yourself that existed before all of this started. The version that was easier, lighter. The version that didn't see everything so clearly, didn't feel the weight of what healing actually costs, didn't understand yet how much of your life was built on foundations that were never solid to begin with. There's going to be a moment where that version of yourself looks almost appealing compared to what you're walking through right now. I need you to understand something about that feeling. That pull backward is not nostalgia, it's withdrawal. Because what you're healing from is not just pain. You're healing from an entire identity that was constructed around being needed, being available, being the person who could hold everything together for everyone else. That identity had weight to it, it had a shape. It gave you a role in every room you walked into. And when you start dismantling it, when you start choosing yourself instead of performing for everyone else's comfort, you lose that shape. For a period of time, you don't know who you are when you're not absorbing, not fixing, not managing, not disappearing. That disorientation is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that the old structure is actually coming down. And here's what nobody tells you about that process. You cannot rebuild on the same foundation. The person you were before the breaking point, the one who was endlessly available and endlessly accommodating and endlessly willing to override their own instincts for the sake of keeping peace, that person cannot be the blueprint for what you're building now. Not because there was nothing valuable in them. There was. Your capacity for depth, for genuine connection, for perceiving what others miss, all of that comes forward. But the part that required your own erasure to function, that part doesn't get to come with you. This is why integration is not a return. You are not recovering a previous version of yourself. You are constructing something that has never existed before. A version of you that carries all the perception and depth and emotional intelligence you've always had, but now operates it from a place of complete internal authority. You stop asking for permission to trust what you know. You stop softening your assessments to make other people comfortable. You stop treating your own clarity as something that needs to be apologized for. What gets built in that process is structurally different from anything you've been before. More stable, more honest, more capable of genuine connection. Because for the first time, you're showing up as an actual person rather than a function. And most people in your current life built their relationship with the function, not with you. There is something that happens to your perception on the other side of integration that nobody in the personal development space talks about honestly. Because if they did, if they actually described what it feels like to walk through the world with a fully operational, fully conscious emotional intelligence system, it would terrify people. Not the people who are doing their own work, not the people who are living with integrity and showing up honestly in their relationships. Those people don't feel threatened by someone who sees clearly. But everyone else? Everyone who is running a quiet manipulation somewhere? Everyone who is performing a version of themselves that doesn't match what's happening underneath? Everyone who has built their relationships on the assumption that the people around them aren't paying close enough attention? They feel it immediately, and they cannot explain why. This is what actually changes in you, not your warmth, not your capacity for connection, not your ability to be present with someone who is genuinely struggling. All of that remains, actually deepens, because it's no longer diluted by your own unprocessed chaos. What changes is the accuracy, the signal that was always there, always picking up information, always registering what was real underneath what was performed. That signal stops being interrupted by your need to be liked, your fear of conflict, your trained instinct to override what you know in favor of what's more comfortable to believe. You start receiving information cleanly. And clean information is a completely different thing from what you were working with before. Before, you would feel something was wrong and immediately begin negotiating with that feeling. You'd sense deception and then construct 12 reasons why you were probably misreading the situation. You'd detect someone's real intention underneath their stated intention and then convince yourself you were being unfair, paranoid, too suspicious. You had the data and you spent enormous energy arguing yourself out of trusting it, because trusting it had consequences. Trusting it meant confrontation. Trusting it meant potentially being wrong in a way that hurt someone, and being the cause of someone else's pain felt worse than quietly absorbing the damage of ignoring what you knew. That internal argument is what integration ends, not dramatically, not with a sudden burst of confrontational confidence where you start calling out every person in your life. It's quieter than that. It's just, you feel something and you believe it. Someone tells you one thing and their behavior communicates something else entirely. And instead of spending 3 days convincing yourself to give them the benefit of the doubt, you simply note the discrepancy and factor it into how you move forward. No drama, no accusation, just accurate information being used appropriately. And this is what terrifies the wrong people, because they can feel it. They can feel when someone is actually seeing them, not the version they're presenting, but the actual mechanics of what they're doing. They sit across from you, and something in them recognizes that the performance isn't landing the way it used to. That the story they're telling has met someone who can feel the distance between the story and the truth. They don't necessarily know what you're picking up, they just know that something in the interaction is different, that they can't find the angle, that the usual entry points aren't there. That discomfort you create in those people is not cruelty, it's not aggression. You're not doing anything to them, you're simply present, fully, clearly, consciously present. And for someone operating from deception, genuine presence is the most threatening thing in the world, because presence sees. And they have spent considerable effort making sure they were surrounded by people who were too distracted, too accommodating, too busy managing their own unconscious material to actually look directly at what was happening. You are no longer that person. You look, you see, and what you see you trust completely.